So now that we have covered some of the basics of robotic process automation, it's important that we zoom in on how organizations are implementing this new technology in order to increase their productivity. And in this module, we will zoom in on what a typical roadmap for an implementation of robotic process automation in an organization looks like. We will look at approaches at how organizations maintain their robots, which provides some unique challenges because it's not a typical software system that has to be maintained. And finally, we will look at the impact that robotic process automation will have on the workforce in the long run. Alright then, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started on this module. Now, one of the core strengths of robotic process automation is that it is so-called bilateral IT. In other words, you can implement it top-down or with a grassroots approach. So, a top-down approach is usually when an organization initiates a center of excellence, and within the center of excellence, we have large software robots that are intertwined with the primary processes of the organization. These large and complex robots usually require some technical knowledge, and therefore a center of excellence where all this knowledge is gathered is very useful when implementing these large robots. A grassroots approach, however, is when different individuals in the organization who do not necessarily have a lot of technical knowledge all have their individual robots that they can use to automate the processes that are important to them and to take away some of those repetitive tasks so they can focus on other things. Now, the good thing about this dual approach is that it has a unique value proposition. So let's take a look at an example. In a classical top-down implementation, the implementation typically looks like this. We have a planning phase, a design phase, a build phase of the robots, we have a test phase, and then we implement the robot into the organization. Now, this is not specific to the implementation of a robot, it can also be any other piece of software in the organization. And it is only at this point that there will be a large spike in value where the organization actually benefits from the entire implementation that took place. So this is a typical implementation roadmap from a top-down approach. When we take a grassroots approach, usually you create lots of small robots and you see the value increase over time. Now obviously the value doesn't increase as much per robot as it would in the larger implementations. However, it does provide value straight away, which might be beneficial for the organization. Some organizations call this the low-hanging fruit. And when we look at processes that are typically automated early in the process by means of individual robots that do not require a center of excellence, these are usually things like invoicing, taking notes, and automating small office tasks. Now, when we combine the grassroots approach with the top-down approach, the graph looks more like this. We have the small robots that are being implemented that provide value over time each time a robot is created, but we also have the large implementation that runs in parallel. Once that implementation has been completed, we see a huge spike in value, and again we continue with the normal robot implementations that happen on the grassroots level. This type of implementation has the benefit of small robots that instantly provide value, and the large implementation of larger processes and more complex robots. Now, how does this translate to an implementation roadmap? A typical roadmap for an organization looks like this. We have a management layer, we have an integration layer, and we have the teams layer. And usually it all starts on the team layer. There, in multiple iterations, we select the best process to be automated, we create the robot, and then it goes into maintenance. But for these small robots, the maintenance actually means the individual that created the robot, usually a business user, takes control over the robot, and once the process changes or the underlying software changes, then the robot is maintained by the individual user. We call this stage the isolation stage. Because all the robots are isolated, usually there's not a central approach to robot management, and it has not been seen as a strategic initiative yet. Then the next thing that happens is that there is a tipping point in the organization. This tipping point is when management becomes aware of robotic process automation and sees the benefit for a strategic approach. This can either be the success of individual robots that are created on a team level, as shown in this graph, but it could also be the need to replace legacy systems or some other critical business need that requires management to act on robotic process automation. Then management forms a so-called coalition. You also see this in the implementation of Agile. This is a coalition between subject matter experts and management to make sure that there is top coverage for the large implementation of robotic process automation. And right around that time, it's also necessary to start training people on the RPA. So that means awareness courses for management, technical courses for the people implementing the RPA, but also courses on how to get started with RPA for the regular business users. So the training will be available for both management and the experts in the organization, but also the people creating robots on the local level. And part of the coalition is also setting up the Center of Excellence. The Center of Excellence is a gathering of all the experts on RPA, so usually these are business analysts, but also software engineers that can create the robots. The business users on the working level continue to build their robots, but now they have the availability of the Center of Excellence and the training to help them in their path to create better robots and maintaining them. This is what we call the supported phase of the implementation. Then after the organization matures further in their robotic process automation implementation, we see the number of robots increase on the working level, but there are also deployments of strategic robots initiated by management that require a more comprehensive approach and usually touch more systems in the organization. An important difference with the previous phases is that there is an integration phase where we integrate the local robots with the larger robots in the organization and make sure there is a comprehensive approach to maintaining and integrating these robots throughout the organization. And lastly, we will focus on the strategic implementation of robotic process automation. This is the highest maturity level. So after we have top-down and grassroots robots implemented and they integrate on a continuous manner, then it's time to go for a strategic approach where we select, create and maintain robots in an integrated way throughout the organization. So people have the ability to create robots either locally or as a strategic initiative and make use of the Center of Excellence and the training facilities within the organization to automate their processes and make sure that the organization becomes as productive as possible. Now, the exact order in which all of these things take place might vary from organization to organization. It's important to realize, however, that all of these steps need to be executed when the organization is going to an RPA implementation, but in the end, the goal should be to have a strategic approach to robots in order to maintain them in the long run and keeping them maintained and adjusted to the processes in the organization. Alright, so this is a typical roadmap. But another challenge that organizations face is how to maintain all of these robots. So let's take a look at that next.